Welcome to the discussion. I'm Barry Pavel. I think we'll dive right into it, but a brief introduction. I think this is going to focus on the future of society, and I think Chris Schroeder yesterday reminded us that we're really on the very cusp of the digital age. I mean, we feel like we've been involved in it. It's very immersive, but we're really just at the very beginning. And I think the purpose of this discussion here, we want to find out where we're headed. And we also want to tease out utopian and dystopian futures and the black swans and black elephants and any other relevant animals or robotic insects that will get us there. Chris Schroeder's presentation was a very optimistic one, which I share, but our job is to really frame both trajectories. And I think it's important that we remind ourselves that with human ingenuity and optimism and positiveness also comes human frailty and human darkness. And now that humanity, as I think some of the presentations just reminded us, is now enabled by technology to take us onto both trajectories and in many ways a hybrid future. So we want scenarios coming out of this. We also want the indicators getting to the scenarios, and that's where we're headed. Dave Snowden and I will co-moderate, and just a reminder before I pass to him for this first session on society, he is both much more intelligent than I am, but more importantly, he sounds much more intelligent because of his Welsh accent. So over to you, Dave.
That's designed to put you severely in your place before you proceed. I know the game, all right? The way we decided to run this is I've got more expertise on society, Barry's got more expertise on terrorism, so we'll chair and or provoke alternately between two sessions. Yeah? So I want to throw out a couple of significant challenges here, because one of the concerns I've got over today and yesterday is everybody has talked about technology and changing things, but nobody has talked about changing ways that we think about the world. Yeah? Not only that, the way that people have described the world is using thinking which, to be quite honest, was getting out of date in the 60s and 70s. Right? I was told to be provocative, so I'm going to be. Right? If we actually look at this as sort of history of thinking, systems thinking, which came in after the war, is a way of thinking systematically. It's defined by values, goals, scenario planning. The assumption is some committee of the great and good design a value-based, goal-based system which we all orientate. You know, it's far too difficult to manage things by managing them bottom up. So we manage them by deciding where we would like them to be and hope that's achieved. And that tends to be utopian. Yeah? We then started to see what I now term computational complexity, which comes out of Santa Fe and elsewhere, which you start to see building into things like big data. It focuses on models. It actually starts to remove the concept of human mediation. The assumption is that just as we can model the way that termites construct a nest based on pheromone-based stimulation of genetically encoded rules, so we can just, if we get enough data, model anything to tell you anything. We don't need that human intervention. Yeah? What I consider to be the third period on that, the stuff that we're working on at the University of Wales and elsewhere, is what we call anthro-complexity, the combination of anthropology and the humanities with complexity, which says we need a new synthesis of our understanding of society, which isn't purely based on computational modeling and isn't based on top-down direction. Right? So that means we've got to look again at things like citizen engagement. Right? Citizen engagement is not a consultative process. It needs a bottom-up generation of nudges and changes within society. Yeah? Now, I'm not going to go into that in depth. We're running major initiatives at the moment, the first big one in Wales, which will have every school child at the age of 16 becoming a citizen journalist to their own communities every month. So we create a human-mediated feedback rather than a social media feedback into the system. Social media is now becoming the problem, not the solution. And I'll make a statement I made, I think, at IRAHSS 10 years ago. Anything an algorithm can interpret, an algorithm can create. And we need to start to think through the implications of that. If we increase human buffering, human agency in the system, we can change the way that things work. And I wasn't heard until after Brexit, after Trump, After Brexit in the UK, I was suddenly having meetings with ministers because the realization of the way that social media is corrupting society rather than the optimistic enabling change. That's me being dystopian, yeah, in terms of the way we work. So I want to throw in 3 key concepts and throw these out to questions. One of the things which comes out of anthropocomplexity is an ecological model, apex predator theory. So what actually happens when an ecosystem is disrupted, the existing dominant predators can no longer survive because they're over-optimized for the previous ecosystem, and something small, completely unexpected, which is energy efficient and adaptive, enters as a new dominant predator, and then a new ecosystem organizes around them, and basically they survive until the ecosystem is disrupted again. Now we can see this in industry. If you go back to the 40s, the domination of technology by IBM, which is based on hardware. IBM then don't realize that the world has gone from hardware to software, so then Microsoft dominates the next period. IBM almost doesn't survive. And then Microsoft doesn't realize we've moved from software to ecosystem. And I think most of us actually think Apple are probably dominating that, but it's not given yet. The point is you give these radical, sudden, discontinuous changes in which the whole system changes. Now you see the same thing in politics. The post-war consensus then starts to die out with the growth of neoliberalism. The domination of neoliberalism and income inequality is then creating a fracture point. That ecosystem is no longer sustainable, and the dominant predator may be Trump. Yeah? If you actually, the history of humanity, the repetition of the Weimar Republic is huge. We're planning to run a program in Wales at the moment to educate children in the history and music of the Weimar Republic, because they need to be aware of what happened then, because you can see almost parallel repetition, including the withdrawal of intellectuals into conferences where they talk about how the future will be wonderful, rather than engaging with reality. I make no direct reference or hypocritical statements here, you understand, right? So I think we need to think about the apex predator theory, because you get very narrow windows of opportunity where something new can come in, and you can't start again once a new pattern is established. And just to say, the dominant economic model that the human race has evolved for climate change, for resource scarcity, is tyranny and feudalism, not democracy. Yeah, that's the natural low energy state, and one of the issues is how do we avoid it? The second question I want to introduce is value mediation. Everybody keeps talking about money as a constraint. Yeah, money was originally developed to allow us to exchange goods broadly without the need to carry them. It's now become the commodity rather than the means of exchange. Yeah, money is now the commodity that people want to own, and we're seeing the same with Bitcoin. One of the things we're working on at the moment, if you look at more primitive, and I put that in inverted commas, societies, they work off gifting, not means of exchange. So if I come back to our opening speech from Nicole, which nobody has really referred to yet, but I want to come back to that. The concept of a social campus is a really interesting one that she raised. But notice within it, she had credits. She still had a means of exchange. The way that gifting works in society is you have obligations to a group of people you know, and provided in some way or other you contribute, you receive. It's not an exchange mechanism. And interesting, I just came off a 2-hour conference call this morning with people in the Valley. A group of us are now looking at, can we use the blockchain to actually measure gifting and create new forms of governance, rather than effectively create another means of exchange which becomes traded like money gets traded. So I think there's a massive issue about how do we measure and contribute value in society. And coming back to Peter, we really need to talk about some stuff we're doing on obesity, by the way, all right? One of the big issues in medicine is there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't give free at the point of entry healthcare and free at the point of education. We just choose to ration it with money. Yeah, and if we want to think the unthinkable, think that choice. And if you want the best science fiction writer on that, look at Ian M. Banks and his culture novels, which posits a society in which mankind lives with AI, but which in money is no longer the means of determining value. And it's both dystopian and utopian. Yeah, and those novels are worth reading and studying. So that's the value creation. And the final one I wanted to throw in was the whole concept of education. People keep focusing on things, not connectivity. 101 complex adaptive systems theory, what matters is how things connect, not what they are. Yeah? And that's actually critical to understand. Now, one of the ways that we connect things as humans is through art. Cave painting comes before language in human evolution. It turns out that art allowed us to make novel connections because it allows us to move up to a high level of abstraction so we connect things in radically different ways. And what are we doing? We're focusing on STEM education, technology education. We're denigrating the art, we're denigrating the humanities, we're denigrating the ability to see things in novel or different ways, yeah, in terms of the way we work. So the three questions I want to throw out is a window of opportunity for change to prevent it becoming tyrannical, because the default condition for human change under conditions of uncertainty is tyranny. So how do we change the energy gradient so that's not the natural state? Yeah? The second question is, how do we mediate value? How do we judge value in a future society? And the third is, what type of education do we need to provide so that citizens can genuinely engage in their future?
Can we respond to that?
Yep.
So I like that a lot. And the two characters in my little vignette that were meant to draw out on that, there was Justine Truffaut, obviously the Canadian reference, who is representing the opposite of xenophobia, tyranny often expressed through exclusion of others. And then the Silicon Valley character, Brody Brocoder, which is both a dig at Silicon Valley and respect to that, because they had a gift economy, blockchain-based gift economy in that respect. And I quite like the way you've articulated that, because we are facing this schism. If you look at the polar opposites of those, tyranny is a nice summary of that. It's xenophobia, exclusive, dominating, and that's sort of what most people live in today. So I think the key question is, if we are facing, or let's say we're beginning to face this new window of opportunity, what are the indicators that tell us that, okay, wait, now there's time for action, and can we prepare for that action in advance to help tip the people's social character away from more Trump and closer towards Justine Trudeau and Mr. Brody Brocoder, as it were?
Can I try to push on this a little bit? I mean, I think it's easy to sort of go after Trump. He's so blatant and obvious and just in your face, in my face on Twitter, everybody else's. But I think, I mean, what I'd love to hear more about is the more nuanced forms of societal, sort of societies not fulfilling their potential. I mean, let's look at China. Let's look at Russia. I mean, China's performing brilliantly in so many areas, but the societal health, I think, is a question that doesn't get examined that much. I'd love to hear more about sort of the more nuanced in the health area and crime, in the fourth IR. I mean, how do we, and in what you're addressing, Noah, how do we get at the sort of more subtle forms of societal dysfunction in the future behind a veneer of relative health and robustness?
If I may jump in on that, one thing I would like to comment in the beginning, that you understand where I'm going. If you're not here now, you're here in the audience at this conference, but if you're at home, and if you live through an average day, all your actions are highly predictable. You will get up, you will have the same morning routine, you will get to work, you will check your emails, you will do the same. So when it's about taking this, in these computational models, do we now represent the human factor, yes and no? Most of the times, 95% of the cases, yes, it's very easy to reflect, because if you like it or not, all of you are very easy to predict in almost all of our actions. And this spawned the field of computational social science, and we now, basically what we have learned in this field is that we need to change what the meaning of prediction is. Prediction doesn't mean anymore, as they have in the 18th century, that we can predict if we increase the temperature of water above 100 degrees, the thing will evaporate, or if I drop this pencil, it will fall down. But prediction now means, for example, that I know that the next social tie that you will make is most likely a friend of yours who will be introduced by that. And if you know your social network, I can make a pretty good guess who will be your next social tie. So that is to say, the computational and complexity approaches I vehemently disagree that they factor out the humans. They just show us, if we like it or not, that most of the times they're very easy to predict. And of course, the same goes then for health problems.
I think that's very interesting topic to discuss. I would say that this is clear that the world is getting diversified, more diversified, which means that many things are getting complicated. One thing, for instance, the understanding of privacy in many contexts. The understanding of privacy and security in Singapore is different those in China, in the United States, in the UK. So seeking the one single definition or understanding of privacy is getting difficult. It's not right or wrong, it's just a state of play, the current situation. Some people like to push their own understanding of the privacy, but it may not be priority in other countries. And then social media is disrupting this situation further, because social media is putting like-minded people into that direction. It's more silo and silo. They just share the information with like-minded people, and sometimes there is a clear divide between two sides. And then when it comes to the change has its enemy. All the time we need to look at the change from a different perspective. We often mention actually the people, process, and technology. Maybe we can start with technology, because I think the money was mentioned in the context of the Bitcoin or the blockchain. Money didn't exist so actually far ago. Actually, the trade was made between goods. But I think in order for human being to make a trade in an easier way, to reduce uncertainty, the money was created, institution was created, government was created, again, to simply make transaction secure and certain than before. I would say that blockchain is kind of technological institution to be put in place and somehow to replace existing structure, not yet done, but I think there is a potential for the blockchain to do so. So fast saver without any institution in the middle of the transaction, because blockchain technology is designed to create trust among distrusted environment. So usually I think that sharing information, trading need trust, unless otherwise it doesn't work. But because of the distrust among stakeholders, blockchain is working somehow. And technology can play a significant role to change the world. And then it is developed or led by the private sector. In terms of the process, I think government should have the larger role to play than the others. Government should provide the framework where that the private companies, individual can benefit from existing services and the tools. So rather than creating barrier, but sometimes just like a cyber security, creating barriers to prevent the crime from happening. So sometimes creating rules is very important, but many governments are reluctant to create hurdle because it sounds like quite bureaucratic or more protectionism. The last one is the people, person. It's more actually challenging to change because old habit die hard. This is an old saying, but it's true. Educating people is very challenging, especially in this diversified world. It's very challenging. People have same tools like an iPhone, but they use in different contexts. But the key word is interconnectivities. We live in the interconnected world, meaning that we are only as strong as our weakest link. So in order for us to make ourselves secure, our society secure. We need to take care of others. Actually, this is very important. Protecting ourselves, our land border, sea border, does not necessarily mean that we can have the safe city or society. Actually, this requires us to change mindset in terms of the safety, security in the digital age. So I just wrap up the 3 elements when it comes to the society. Yeah, thank you.
I think, is this on?
It'll go.
I'd love to have something clever and disclosive to say, right, that somehow enlightened everyone. But I think, it's not a Yogi Berra saying, but it still holds truth. It comes from a psychology professor I once had who said, nothing hard is ever easy, right? And in this case, the hard work of getting back to making wise choices at a societal level, right, is what is desperately needed. And part of that, I think you mentioned the educational aspect. What are we going to do in that? And so for that, it made me think that as this okay, I don't know if this is on, is it?
Yeah.
All right, I will try to have some mic discipline and not drop off, if at all possible. Maybe I'll just stick it up here. So the idea, when I think about education, one of the things that caused, as a former educator myself, one of the things that caused me to have shivers run up my spine was recently in England when trying to figure out what kind of curricula changes they should be making. They said, well, why don't we go to industry leaders and get CEOs on our panel to help us understand what they want in terms of workers for the future, and they can tell us what types of things that our students need to be studying. And part of me said, wait a minute, but this isn't, we're then just once again, to go back to the idea of living up to our metaphors, right? We're just saying, well, how do we create laborers or economic production units? And one of the things that I think we could do in order to kind of step out of this paradigm and look at it from a different way is not to fall into the trap of allowing technology to drive us into one-dimensionality, which is that everything kind of has a technological solution. The way in which we think about digital technologies and efficiency is a kind of panacea for solving all types of problems. And to start to educate from a very young age students with different ways, not only of valuing things, but different ways of coming up with solutions to problems, and to start this quite early. And what I mean by this is, if we look at the notion of the arts, right, and the role that the arts play, and the fact that the arts can give us different ways of exploring reality. If we think of science, we had the phonograph was one form. There was one form of recording sound, right, that came about. Photography was a form of recording light, right, onto chemical structure. And now everything is digital. Right? But there are multiple ways of exploring the universe, and are we losing that? How do we start from a very young age to help students and children to realize there are different ways of valuing and different ways of exploring, rather than having to already start within the pipeline of the digital technological infrastructure to do so? That's one concept I can think of in terms of moving forward. And then the other thing that I think in terms of how do we get to the social dysfunction, what's behind the veneer, I really liked the idea. I don't know if you know, but there's a researcher at the Weizmann Institute. His name is Udi Shapiro, and Udi is quite provocative in his characterization of the internet, right, and its dysfunction. And so if we think about the metaphor that we use for the internet, we tend to think, oh, well, we'll just create, it's a world that reflects the world we're in. It's a place we go to. I go to an online store or a shop. I buy something, I come out. So if they use my data, well, sure, that's my data. They would use that. They would use that sale data in a regular store. Radio Shack would have asked you for your phone number and your zip code, et cetera. But what he says is, no. It's a landscape. It's not a store. It's a place that you're walking through where where you're actually, it's feudalism, to go back to that notion of it being a default state, that it's actually feudalism. And that you're being monetized for your work for somebody else in that space in a way that we would never allow in the modern world, et cetera. And so how can we look into that space and say what is going on in there that contradicts our basic notions of values within society? Where does it come into conflict with our notions of human rights? What do we need to do in order to have the type of the identities and other types of characteristics and attributes that we can provide to human beings so that we can have the same type of care and consideration for one another in a virtual world, which will not go away, right, over the next century, as we do in the physical world that we're in. So, education, thinking about multiple ways of looking at the world and valuing it and deciphering it, and then also looking into how do we build the world in that virtual world that reflects the kind of fundamental philosophical structures, right, that we have embedded in institutions in the physical world.
Just to throw an additional provocation on that, I let two of my research assistants, one of whom happens to be my daughter, so I get indulgent on that, right? They wanted to run a program on meaning and identity, looking at spirituality, the role of the physical world, the role of history. So I let them do it. It turned out to be the most popular program amongst young people. It wasn't about the future of technology, it wasn't about engineering skills, it was about health, meaning, identity, what it means to be part of society. And I think that's one of the things we're missing at the moment, is allowing people to engage in those conversations.
No, I would agree in that. I think to reduce parts of the human experience to irrelevancy simply because they don't fit within the particular type of productivity paradigm that we apply to economic, output, but doing that in our social spaces, and then kind of having this almost technologically invasive species, right? That is kind of pushing our ways out of there. That's interesting. I'm not sure that it means that we should get rid of technology or we should be technophobes or that we should do that, but it certainly means that we need to be thinking more about, as you were saying, not just how things are connected, but I would even take it a step further from how they're connected from the ontological structures, right, that we build, those agency networks between things and what those models look like, to what do they mean for us, right? And that's what I would say.
I would like to, if I may, quickly comment on this education technology interface by giving two examples which are, I think, very, very interesting in this way. One is the game Fold It. I don't know if anyone in the audience knows that. So basically, as you know, one of the computationally most complicated tasks is how a protein is arranged in space at a given temperature. And we don't have any efficient means of computing that. What some researchers did is to make a game where you see this protein and you can, by yourself, play with it around and rearrange it, and you see how good your configuration is. And some people got hooked on this game, and the result, to cut the long story short, is that there is now a 12-year-old Indian boy who's written a Nature paper because he has devised the best protein folding algorithm. And so this is one, technology always is a means and not an end, and in this way, when it comes to gamification of complex concepts, this is, I think, a very efficient means. The second one is there is an initiative in India which is about basically also gamification, and everyone in India knows cricket and knows the rules of cricket. And this is about sexual protection, and it says, okay, you play a cricket game, and then you can try a high-risk or a low-risk variant. And if you execute the high-risk variant, the games tell you if you do this is like having sex without a condom, more or less. And this is how you can use this technology to reach people all around the world, and I think this is one of the enabling features of technology in this sense.
Can I throw one more question out to the panel, and we should probably go to the floor after that, right? I want to make a distinction between commodity and value. Now, I may not have brought this out earlier. It used to be money was a means of creating value to allow people to exchange commodities to improve their life. But then money became the commodity, which has implications for crime as well, right? If you actually had to steal things, it's more difficult to prevent. But if you're just stealing the means of exchange, right? So I think what I'd like each of you to look at from the perspectives you came at, and I think this is a health issue as well, it's moving to health as a value system, not as a commodity provision by professionals. One of the things I'm passionate about at the moment is how do you give people agency in their own health journey rather than making recipients of professional advice and determination, right? So I think this value v commodity for me is one of the key things. At the moment we're focused on commodities and use of commodities and commodification. I think the point about what it is when people come into space, they become commodities. What's the difference between commodity and value, and how do we create value so that people have an alternative focus than just acquisition of commodity?
So Bill Sharp, you might know Bill Sharp, another one. I think he's Welsh as well, isn't he? He's got this great phrase.
He gets around a bit.
He
There's
does
only
get
3
around.
million of us, but we get around a bit.
He's got this great phrase, economies of meaning. And the idea is that, and it's primarily for innovation and arts communities, but the idea is, I think Honor might have worked with him, in fact, the idea is that as soon as money comes into the system, it perverts the actual, the social value of the meaning making in an artistic or creative community. So you want to push the money as far to the edge as possible. And I think that's what's interesting about online communities like Reddit, where you have self-selecting groups of people who come together and they're rewarding each other with fake internet points. I mean, they call it fake internet money, about who's contributing the most interesting content, who's adding the most value to this community. And it might just be about dog jokes or memes or GIFs. And I think if we look at our own lives, those are the most fulfilling experiences that we have. These are experiences where it's not about the value of the exchange, it's about the value of the experience.
Yeah.
And I think that as the rest of our lives become more and more commodified, especially in a technological sense, then those types of value-based economies of meaning are going to become more and more profoundly important to us, and perhaps some of the only things that have real value in a totally commodified world. And therefore, maybe they're going to be more protected and hidden from public.
There was one technology. Let me sort of do a twofer here. On the Mentimeter, one of the black swans that was mentioned was antimicrobial resistance. Peter, and would love to hear your thoughts on that and how it might affect healthcare and society. But another technology that I think might cut across some of your areas is quantum computing, and it's not quite within our grasp now, but I'm sure most, if not all of you, are well aware of its promise, in particular for security, for crime, for encryption. I didn't hear as much of that, and how might that affect society, law enforcement, the way people relate to each other, privacy from government prying, and vice versa. I just think those are a couple of variables that I would think the audience would want to hear about for societal futures that have some pretty significant technology insertions. Peter?
Yeah, if I may, I want to comment first on quantum information, because as it happens, I have a quantum information background as per training. And so first of all, quantum computing. When I started to study physics in 2000, I was told that quantum computer is 5 to 10 years away. Then I did my master thesis at one of the leading research groups in that field, and learned to know the people there. And we had such, meetings where you sit around and share where you want to go in the next years, and no one around this table wanted to say, yeah, in a couple of years we have built a quantum computer. So first of all, yes, there is the Shor algorithm that we can crack certain systems using quantum algorithms, but the technical difficulties for this area seem insurmountable. So if we talk about a horizon of 5 to 10 years, or even 10 to 20 years, this is not something that we need to have on our radar without any technological revolution that is beyond our grasp. Talking about quantum cryptography, the thing is rather different. This is already, I think, ready for market introduction, more or less. There are some prototype studies going on. And long story short, this won't eliminate the human element. And so this will stay constant, and this will also be a need that we have, even if quantum cryptography takes off. And so then to the antimicrobial resistance one, want to keep it short. There's one interesting study where they show that the probability of a doctor prescribing you an antibiotic increases with the hours that he has been working. So the question of this is that we need to build awareness in this instant that when antibiotics can be used and when they cannot be used, and this is something which is certainly might become a big issue, simply because out of laziness, out of too much workload, we build in currently this is a weakness into our healthcare system that we misuse antibiotics more or less. So this is something that we definitely should keep on our radar for the next 5 to 10 years.
But just very quickly, is there a way out of this? I mean, is this going to get worse to the point where the most routine procedures that we are all very comfortable with will no longer be possible? Will this affect societal, individual health in a way that it becomes a significant national or global issue? Or what's your sort of bottom line take?
The bottom line is that, I don't think that you can answer this question generally. You have to decide this on a case-by-case basis. There might be for one specific stem, there might be a different therapy that you can use, or there might be, in some reasons there is, and now we're coming back to value, there might not be yet value enough in order to offer a different cure, but as soon as this realizes, there might be enough value in that. And I briefly mentioned this value-based pricing, and this is, then we are getting into this issue here. What is the societal value of medical treatment? And if here health economics departs from usual economics in that it can not only be the production costs, because if you need to invest $5 billion in order to make sure that this drug is actually working and it's safe, and you can manufacture it for 10 cents and sell it for 10 cents, then there is no incentive to invest this money up front. And this, how do we value, how do we price our medical treatments, and who should make these decisions, is something that we need to decide on a societal basis.
Great. Noboru?
Yeah, thank you so much. The cloud computing, it's a good point. From law enforcement perspective, especially Interpol perspective, that's very important. We are employing cloud computing system when it comes to the service we provide to member countries. We are using cloud computing on our own system. Because I think the cloud computing is fundamental technology when it comes to the big data analysis with the usage of artificial intelligence. And that is going to become the source technology of the future policing, I would say in this way. At the same time, as I mentioned in my presentation, is now data is money. It's data is data. So actually the criminals are targeting data. So from the criminal perspective, it's easier to identify targeting system because the data is going to be centralized in certain point rather than be in decentralized way. They're going to target specific institutions, companies. They are providing the cloud computing solution. So actually, all the times the pros and cons. In the meantime, it is very difficult, I would say challenging for small, medium size of company, maybe country, to establish their own IT system, which would be resilient against cyber attack. Because technologies employed by criminals would be far more advanced than the technology that would be employed in those, actually the country as a companies. So I think this is very challenging situation in terms of the protecting data. I think that the protecting data, but in terms of and then the security of the cloud computing, also the technology related to cloud computing, there is no silver bullet. For instance, many data I use, or document or whatever, would be placed in the Interpol secure cloud. But I think when it comes to very sensitive document, which I need to write, technically speaking, I need to use computer, which is not connected to internet, never. And then when printing out that document, I need to use printer, not connected to Wi-Fi, never. Plug in cable with cable and print it out. So connecting to the internet comes with at certain level of the threat or the vulnerability. It's just matter of the risk management. And then there is no option for companies not to use the cloud computing if you want to go ahead, knowing the vulnerability, the risk coming from the usage of the new technology. But I think that is a very important point.
Thomas?
Yeah, I was going to say, jokingly, just in Dalian, we had our big meeting on science and technology and entrepreneurship from the forum side, and we had a session on quantum, and one of them joked, what does quantum cryptography look like? It looks like here's a plastic rock, and here's a note that I wrote by hand, and I put it inside the plastic rock, and I dropped. We've kind of gone backward in this way if you don't connect through. And the idea is that it really is that quantum may be able to break all of those encryptions, right, that we're talking about. But the idea that we shouldn't have to worry about it in our lifetime is something I would challenge. Because if we think about the history of technology, we have a lot of black swans. You have something like X-rays that came about and changed the direction of technology overnight. You have many instances of people saying, well, this technology is not likely to take off at all, and within 5 years, it's full blown. All that's required is one black swan in this case in terms of quantum computing to kind of set that trajectory. Where they are right now, though, it seems, at least from my understanding, is that there are two different types of quantum computing. There's the quantum general computing, which we aren't there yet, and we can't control all of the qubits. And then there's the quantum annealing computing, in which case they're building complete circuit. Everything is built custom for each one. And of course, this is, and it's not quite sure which one will be the most beneficial to start off with quite yet. And so this is kind of where they're at. As soon as they're able to control a few more qubits, and I think maybe 10 is about as far as some of the people in academic labs are claiming, but they really need to get up to about 100 for it to work. But if something were to come along in that regard, it could be Pandora's box there for a little bit.
I was going to say we should now put it to the floor, I think, yeah? So, guys, any questions? Yeah.
Is this thing on?
Great.
Hey, you had your chance yesterday. Right?
All right. If not for this, Noah.
Go on. Woo!
All right. We talked about society. Finally, we got interesting. And what I'm about to say may get me uninvited to Singapore.
Good. No, not good that you're not invited. Good that we're going to be controversial.
You just did a play. Basically espousing the liberal openness of Canada at the expense of the backward-looking redneck United States. And if you were a representative of Canada, I would say, great, you got us. But you're not. You're speaking as a representative of another country. And I ask you in good conscience, how can you espouse these liberal, open ideas as the paid representative of a country that is not a democracy, that bans homosexuality, that censors the internet, and that is built on the backs of basically indentured servants with no matter how hard they work, no matter how hard they sweat, no matter how much they bleed and sacrifice, can never, ever become citizens of that country.
Okay, we'll take a couple of questions, and Noah says he doesn't...
Yeah, I'll take that one.
Like we did yesterday, all right? Noah says he doesn't want protection, so he can answer that. But let's go, Roger, yeah? And then across here.
Dave, we also have Peter Hope.
And we got Peter, sorry. So, okay, we'll take 4, and then you can all have a go at it, yep?
Okay, so this is a question about a lot of the conversations about changing the system, whatever the system may be. And so if you think about the system, you look at actors in the system, so organizations like tech companies like Apple, for example, where if you look at the Apple workforce, the workforce is primarily composed of young white men who have a problem communicating in real-world social situations. And typically that's same across most of the organizations that control internet traffic, so Google, Amazon, Facebook, and probably the same in the Chinese platforms. Now, they shape the way we see the world, right, through how they control dissemination of communication. There's no transparency in how Facebook works, for example. So if you want to try and change the system, and those organizations have the technology which removes transparency around how lobbying, for example, works and they control public opinion, then I've got two questions and two challenges. One's a practical one. So it strikes me that this lack of diversity in workforces, which then reflects how opinion is shaped in the world, needs to have a level of philosophy applied to it, right? So I don't think we need more technologists, we need more philosophers. So a practical thing, so the challenge for Thomas, Davos should have a panel around how you bring a more philosophical approach into the technologies that we use and people rely on. The provocation for the panel is, given that these opaque technology companies control a lot of public opinion, therefore perhaps mitigate the ability to lobby against them, is it too late to try and change the system?
Yeah. Here, and then Peter to finish, and then we'll go down the panel. Here.
Well, my question is also twofold. I wanted to ask Thomas whether isn't, as it stands now, and the notion of a shift in the means of production affecting problems of inclusivity and diversity, that depends on shifting political context and cultural context. And that in turn really begs the question, I think, of an additional edifice for our discourse, which is namely the technological influence on hermeneutics, on what the political scientists call constructivism, in terms of how technological change informs the formation and interpretation of ideas. And with that being said, my question for Thomas, and this is a very gentle suggestion, or at least something to contemplate, is your assertion of the shift in the means of production affecting inclusivity and diversity as it stands, is that somehow incomplete or overly deterministic or somehow reductionist as it stands, without taking into account the political context and cultural context inherent in operational environments and the relationship between those variables to governmental institutions?
Okay, Peter?
This is trying to bring the discussion to the theme of this morning's session, which is the future of society. And the issue which I would like to pose to the panel is this. Technology, climate change, globalization create forces that could lead to fragmentation, but which could also lead to perhaps making the world a bit smaller than it is. So, for example, the internet, the social media, creates its own communities, which have not necessarily any connection to physical boundaries, to geographical boundaries, to national boundaries. So that's one form of fragmentation. It can be extremely fragmented. Globalization, on the other hand, could lead to the spread of disease. And we heard about the future of crime. That means police forces need not just to be local, but they need to be global. And then climate change leading to the spread of tropical diseases into the more temperate climates. So how does this impact on society, because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. It could be a more fragmented world, it could be a smaller world, it could be a flatter world, and maybe it'd be quite interesting to get some views from the panel on this, because we are, I think, beginning to grapple with these problems, and it's because of how fast things are changing.
Okay, so we got 4 fairly diverse questions there, right? I mean, they're connected. We got the future of society, connectivity, size, what impact that is, all right? We've also got the one about the shift to the means of production. I don't think that's just a question to one person. It's a question about the social construction, the cultural aspects of that, and are we prepared for that? I think that's something I was picking up on at the start as well. Are we thinking about that, right? And then we got the nerds v philosophers debate, and having sat in both camps in my life, it's amusing to see them to come together, right? But are nerds determining the planet? How do we get more philosophers into the process? And then we have the issue about a capitalist tyranny entirely determined by money can't be criticized by a tribal tyranny somewhere in the middle of the Middle East, which anybody can deal with, all right? So we'll move around on that. So start at that end.
I would really like to hear the answer to Max Brooks' question first.
I'm leaving that for last. You've got to start, all right?
Okay, I tried. The fragmentation of society and what does it mean for the spread of disease? Well, first of all, in terms of how we understand how diseases spread around the globe, we increasingly learn that geography, as we have it on the maps, doesn't really matter. What matters is how you have people traveling around. So if you have a spread of a virus, for example, what you observe is that you get a perfectly nice spreading pattern if you don't look at the real world map, but at a map of airports, and put 2 cities closer if there are a lot of planes flying from one city to the next. So this is something that we need to get on people's radar, that it is these new maps that matter. In terms of fragmentation of society, we already see it very strongly that there is a big socioeconomic gradient in health, virtually in every system that we have looked at. And here, I would need 1 hour to discuss the ramifications of this, but I think the gist of it is at some point you have to adapt it. It's hard to make people care about their own health as long as they are not personally affected by it. And how to do this, to make people care about that they are not, maybe are healthy now, but that they're still healthy in 20 years. Yes, I think one of the ways, one of the ways that we are thinking about this goes, again, I said it already 2 times, but I think it's the only way of engaging these people. If you have gone, and we see it now with the Fitbits and how people walk, you need to get status symbols out of this that you live healthy. So think of this: if you go look on somebody's social network and you see, he has the badge that he walks 10,000 steps per day, and he has this kind of badge. I mean, this is age of reality TV. This is what people respond to. This is kind of symbols that signal, I live healthy. And I think to think into this direction, how you can engage people in their own health by making them, by enabling them to show off with their health. This is, I think, a direction that we need to explore.
When it comes to the future society, especially in the context of globalization, I think that the current society, our society is already being affected by globalization, and the future society will be continuously affected by globalization. That is quite sure. But at the same time, we are now looking at a very interesting, actually, the situation or the phenomena, let's say. It's regionalization. If you take a look at the trade, so you have seen a lot of the trade agreement amongst the economic powerhouse. Not only one, not two, several. In the context of the policing, the same. For instance, in Asia, let's say ASEAN region, we have ASEANAPOL taking care of ASEAN region in terms of policing. Of course, back to the 1990s, Europe created Europol, 28 member countries. Then, several years ago, 5 years ago, I guess, the countries in Central and Latin America created Ameripol, taking care of those regions. And then, last year, African Union countries created Afripol. And then, also, GCC country created GCCpol. And then, now it's the latest one, is that the organization, regional organization, so-called ECHO, based in Tehran. So membership is Iran and then 10 neighboring countries to Iran. They created ECHOPOL. So a lot of Pol brothers. So, and then it's not hierarchical. Interpol and then Europol, ASEANPol. No, not like this. All like a networked the organization. Then how can we, for instance, Interpol, understand this situation? Because Interpol was created in 1923. So meaning that perhaps we are not providing proper service to the countries in those regions. Maybe true. I think that the problem is that they are suffering from the current situation, mainly globalization. And then they are trying to help each other in like-minded people. At least the country who shared same value or the same problems. It's complementary role, but they need Interpol as global platform to share information. That is true. It's very complementary. The same can be said to the actually the tech giants, mostly based in the United States, based on my experience with them. The Google, Facebook, Twitter, those companies, well, sometimes they are doing something quite unexpected, but I think that they are also striving to understand the ramification, negative ramification of their services. So if we inform them of the problems law enforcement encounter in the policing, relatively quickly they react to us. Then they are trying to fix the problem. So problem would be sometimes the information coming into them are so diversified. So they are sometimes puzzled by different aspects of information. So actually those things are happening in parallel. So regionalization, globalizations, both are now moving ahead in parallel, but it's not exclusive of each other, but actually they are complementary. And then in terms of the future society, according to the World Economic Forum statistics, still less than 40% of the world population are accessible to the internet. So meaning that the future of society will be changing a lot if 90% of the world population will be able to access to the internet. So this might be a little bit unpredictable, but what I could say is that the future society is more network-based rather than hierarchical-based. And then across the national border, but still some sort of the segregation from others based on the culture, ecosystem, e-commerce, whatever reason, maybe language, etc. I think that is my observation on that issue. Thank you.
Great. So great question. Yeah. First, I'm certainly not here as a paid representative of anyone. I'm on holiday. And whilst I shared the kind of work that we've been doing because I'm very proud of it, and I think for this community, it's quite important in that it represents both a methodological but also political innovation in how our work is done and applied in a political and a corporate context. And I'm proud of it also as well because it has, myself and my team have single-handedly transformed the course of this country's history. We've transformed this over the last 5 years from essentially a luxury tourism destination and a mass consumption exercise into a place that is becoming one of the world's leading test beds for the application and experimentation of emerging technologies focusing on the fundamental issues of our lives like water, healthcare, education, governance, infrastructure, etc. And there are very few places in the world that have the regulatory flexibility and the political leadership to be able to say that we know that self-driving vehicles are coming, let's roll out a citywide testbed here in the next 6 months or 12 months or something, or the blockchain stuff to test this out at scale. And I think that plays an important role in the particular moment in history that we all are living through right now. How do we transition through the end of the 20th century into what the 21st century might become? So I'm here on holiday. I'm not a paid representative of that, and I share this work because I think it's important for this community of practitioners, and I'm quite proud of it. I think you might have misunderstood the play, though. I wasn't espousing any particular view. As I was asked to explore what are the trends and issues that are going to affect the future of society, and I created characters that represent various different competing views on some of the key issues that are going to define our society that are personified. And I just chose to create a play because through that personification and through the very ease of identifying that with very public figures, you're able to quite concisely capture a whole realm of issues and politics and emotions and stuff. Again, don't confuse my analytical, let's say, my artistic representation of an analysis with my personal views. I do think, though, it's quite fair to say that there is a legitimate question as to which of those competing worldviews are going to play out and where and win in the sort of emerging ecosystem of competitiveness over the next decade. Because my personal view and most of the work that our foundation is based on the premise that our entire professional lives, at least for the next 10 years, if not 20 years, is going to be oriented around the total and utter collapse of the 20th century, right? Everything around us, from the governance agreements, from the social contracts, to the business models, to the ecological life support systems that we have built our nations and corporations and livelihoods on, will be decaying at an exponential rate. It already is, and it will continue to decay at an exponential rate. At the same time, the infrastructure and governance agreements and business models and meaning-making sources that will sustain us going forward in the 21st century have yet to be born. Right? There's seeds of them everywhere, but they're not mature enough to be able to carry our societies or our families or our economies yet. So we face at least a decade, if not two, of transition between the old world and the new on quite a profound scale. Right? It's sort of a cliche to say that we're in an era of change, but really the Pope, it's like we're actually in the change of eras right now. And all of our assumptions of our political philosophies, of our personal moral values, of the kinds of business models and the competitive environments we work in, all of these are being severely tested, and it is not clear what the winning values and the winning models are going to be like. So I think that it's important to differentiate between the kind of world that we want to see, and of course I have a particular political philosophy that I would like to see, and I work in my family to instill those values in my children and in my community and my professional life, and the kind of values that are going to be successful given the fact that we've already lost the battle on climate change. Climate change will not be prevented. Our entire children's lives and our children's lives are going to be defined by the onset of rapid, potentially catastrophic, irreversible climate change. Given that many of the technologies which Thomas and others have already described are largely rolling out without any control. They're fast, cheap, and out of control. No one has influence over these things. And that the kind of political relationships which have defined who we are and where we are under fundamental transition. So I think there's a lot to play for. That's quite exciting. I think the kind of work which I've been privileged to do is a very effective, I joke with my colleague Stuart and others that, I've weaponized design fiction. I've weaponized experiential futures. And that's important because, ultimately, if we're going to be in a contest for what the next apex predator looks like, we have to be able to articulate a coherent vision for the world that we want and have tools to persuade others that this is a world that is going to be of value for them. In this transitional space, I think, the crisis of the transition is only really just getting started. I was very happy to talk about the future of society because most of the people that are going to be affecting that change are not in this room. Most of them don't care about us. They're mostly 15-year-old Africans right now or 12-year-old Filipinos who are fishermen and when they get access to a smartphone and a drone and a bomb, their response to these issues is going to be visceral, is going to be felt, and it's not going to be a rational one. It's not going to be it will be very rational from their perspective. They're going to be pissed off that we're sitting here on stage in nice suits, getting nice meals in a wonderful city, and they don't have access to that. just to respond very briefly to Peter's point, like bringing these together in terms of scenarios, and in my heart, I'm a strategist and a scenario planner. So I will offer 3 possible views for what the world of the future looks like as these 5 or more trends come together to fight. The first is one of post-enlightenment, post-rationality, weak state / failed state organizational development. When I like to call this one place-based resource cults engaging in magical warfare for diminishing returns in a failing climate. Quite possible. The other one, which is a more centralized, strong state version, is centralized hive mind techno-despots that live forever, surrounded by a sea of basic income, virtual reality internment camps. And the third, which is what I hope, is what I like to call the visionary state, right? And this is a small, and I think small is the key word here because this is the scale that is manageable in these transitions, small city-states or corporations that have visionary leaders who are able to articulate an inspiring vision for how we get through this transition and galvanize others to support it, and then take the action to demonstrate steps in that role. That's what I think is being done right now in the UAE. I think that is something which Singapore is doing. There are many corporations who are doing that. I've yet to see that in many of the bigger Western democracies as much as I would hope that's the case. And I hope that, personally, I hope that we go towards a world where we're able to articulate and get together to commonly push for a core direction. But if not, we'll end up in one of the other 2.
Okay, we've got limited time left, so we've got time to take 2 or 3 more questions and then have short responses, I think, yeah? Any more questions coming from the floor? Yeah, in the middle there, and then in the middle here. Yeah, I can't see any other hands up. Okay, we'll take those 2, and then we'll go to the panel, yeah? So in the middle here and over there.
Maybe with an observation. I think the traditional value sphere of society was linked to geographical units. And I see that this is going to be moved to the cyberspace. And the fight for values is already there. If you look at ISIS, how you radicalize society, this mainly happens in this value sphere in the internet. I would like to raise the question, how do you see this development, that this value sphere is moving from geographical units, community states, and so to the cyberspace?
Okay, and then in the middle. Yeah.
Yes. Antti Kaski from the Foreign Ministry in Finland. Thank you for excellent presentations and good discussion. I would like to continue where I think Noah Raford left us, insisting on the new political decision-making system or forms that we might have, because we have all heard how the society is changing, how our lives are changing, even values or at least aspirations of people in the new production structures or whatever. But many of the solutions are still kind of state-based legislation, new authority, government collaboration. Of course, I'm also ready to admit that I truly would hope the liberal democratic system and representational government and social justice system continuing, but keeping those values and principles. Could the new technologies, for example, provide us new solutions to political decision-making, self-organizing networks, direct democracy, crowdsourcing, maybe from big data, whatever new kind of cross-national formations? What could be the actual solutions for this dilemma? Thanks.
Okay, final quick question here.
Just quickly, I noticed no discussion on post-gender society, and we've been doing some workshops in New Zealand and talking about not having birth certificates that have gender on it, and I just wanted to raise it because it seemed missing. Thank you.
Okay, guys, we've got 3 questions there. All right, we're all comfortable, so we'll reverse the direction this time, so Noah, you can go first, yeah?
Okay, great.
Give Peter thinking time, all right, but watch the clock.
I'll be quick.
Divide that by 4, guys, yeah?
Yeah, okay, great, 3 minutes each. Internet-based value spheres, I think that's a profoundly insightful comment. You know, one of my throwaway lines at the end of my talk was, if you want to know what the future of society looks like, just look at the web. This is what's already happening now. It still is constrained by the realities of how we get our salaries paid and where we live. I mean, the physical proximities is still extremely important. But I think potentially as we move closer towards some sort of distributed income or remote income, and as virtual reality and augmented reality becomes more profoundly influential, that might diminish. But certainly from the kind of things that we think are cool, the kind of people that we aspire to be, a lot of that is being defined by people globally on the internet now. State-based responses to these challenges, I agree with you 100%. I mean, that's why I define my little third scenario as the visionary state, because no matter how big of a corporation you are, if you operate in a capitalist market, you aren't going to be able to provide for the kind of public goods which are associated with, loss-leading things like infrastructure and public security. My PhD was in crowdsourcing for governance. I do a lot of work in blockchain. I'm unconvinced that we've yet to come onto a workable decentralized model that would enable us to live in a post-state world. That's why I think the state is so important in managing these transitions. And I think the post-gender society thing is sort of part and parcel of this multi-layering, multi-dimensional explosion of identity, which is being digitally enabled. And I think we'll see more of that, weirder of that. I mean, if you've been to San Francisco, there are people walking down the street in furry costumes and sex parties, and it's a very diverse and exciting world out there.
Okay.
Okay. When it comes to the governance and then cyberspace, I think it's quite a challenging question to the law enforcement, because the source of power of law enforcement comes from actually the national sovereignty. So investigation, etc., comes from the power of nation states. But at the same time, if I take a look at what is going on in Europe, so maybe in the future, it's maybe option to give up certain power of national sovereignty to some organization. Regionally, it's possible. Globally, I don't know if it is possible. But it's very challenging because of that is really touching fundamental structure of the current governance model. Again, that needs really mindset change, which is really fundamental. But what is interesting, actually, based on the discussion, especially yesterday, but that actually the presenter mentioned that the three-dimensional as a power: geopolitics, geoeconomics, and then geotechnology, as far as I correctly remember. I think that's very interesting because it's no more 2D model, it's a 3D model. And I believe that all of three are not exclusive to each other. It's combination. And then that combination is going to define the governance model of the future of society, of the future of the world. And then especially the geotechnology, especially coming from the cyberspace or the digital technology, that will be more influencing over the way we live, we govern society. I think that is going to be some sort of the tipping point when it comes to the new governance model in the future, but not in 5 years, maybe more than 10 years. Thank you.
I'd like to say that in a number of ways, I agree with No. I think we're past the point of, not just the point of no return, that sounds a little bit too doomsday, but certainly past the tipping point in terms of things like climate change, in terms of how communities are going to form in the future, the type of the economic value communities. I thought is a very good point, and something that is going to be a part of our future, and what those are going to look like. We have the opportunity now to be able to start to shape those, right, and put those together. So the values question for me is quite interesting, precisely because in terms of the governance. In terms of the governance question, primarily what we see from studying and meeting with policymakers, CEOs, social influencers, et cetera, is that more than 90% are unprepared. If you look at the new data regulations that are coming out next July in Europe, all of the companies that are going to be affected by that, including all of the companies that do business with them that will be affected by that are in the United States, are more than 90% are still at ground zero. They still haven't made any steps forward with what do we need to do to be prepared for this, and they're not even quite sure, many of them, what they're supposed to do to start that process. So I think we're to a certain point where some of these technologies are going to form what our future is going to look like, because we've started the conversation a bit too late. It doesn't mean that it wasn't worthwhile to start the conversation, because at least the more we build awareness, the better we'll be as we move forward. In terms of, so it's interesting there. And the other one is in terms of the type of psychographics that are coming out. If you look at something like Tinder, imagine that if in Tinder, not just it gave you everyone who was around you, but it said, we'll only give you the kind of people we think you like.
And that like you.
And that like you. Well, you might say, that's great for me, but in a way, is it really? Because what happens is it builds a wall where everyone in your world should be a certain way, and anyone who is not that way can be ignored, right? And is that the kind of value set that we want to create in the future as it goes forward? And so we need to think about those kind of like little niggly bits in there, right? Like how do we focus on those and fix them? And then in terms of the post-gender, I would say go past post-gender and let's start thinking about post-humanist society. We've got to get past the dualistic types of frameworks and start to think about what are the new ontologies, the new constellations of being look like. How do we create institutions for those? Because all of our institutions that are collapsing from the 20th century are built on that Enlightenment rationalist subject-object model. And we've got to do something, and if we don't do it now, then we really will collapse. And that means that incumbents in Western liberal democracies are going to have to sacrifice power to the things, and that's it. Yeah. So.
Yeah, in interest of the time, I'm going to keep it really short. So first, what happens if we shift the decision-making process to the cybersphere? I think I'm in line very much with what Noah said here. Basically, the same social forces will apply there. Maybe what changes is the time scale of things. Yeah. And then the other thing is, how will this digital transformation impact the way that we do governance? And I think one of the things that is currently being, that is within the realm of the reachable, and which we're currently working on, is that we can at least use data-driven methods to build in safeguards into the democratic process. By, for example, studying how do election results look like if they really represent the will of the free will of the people, and to in which kind of aberrations, which kind of statistical anomalies do we observe in election results if there was some tampering. And here, this is actually one of the opportunities there is in such data as election results we present, that if we learn how they are distributed, we can make infer conclusions about was there ballot stuffing going on, was there gerrymandering going on, was there vote stealing going on, where at some places voter systematically intimidated, was the voter coercion, all these things leaves fingerprints in the data. And the detection of these methods in order to make safeguards for the democratic process, I see indeed huge potential.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of it. I'll hand back to Barry to close, but no, okay, I'm not. One question to ask the audience, all right? Because I think it's about time you did something, and you can put it into whatever the system is and log on. I think we're allowed to do that, all right? I was reading a literary critic the other day who argued that Aldous Huxley actually saw Brave New World as a utopia, not a dystopia. Yeah? And I'd actually argue a lot of the transhumanists are probably in exactly the same camp. That concept of an engineered perfect society is attractive, right? So one point there. Dystopic. I think my personal view is the reality is, because I'm a dystopian, that Game of Thrones is far more likely than Brave New World. Yeah. But those are probably the two choices we're facing, neither of which are particularly desirable. Yeah? And the other point I want to make is that futurologists, to my mind, are often effectively lotus eaters. Yeah, it's very easy to be a futurologist and to be a lotus eater, not to engage. So a real question to everybody, and this is one we're asking in a lot of forum at the moment. Within the compass of your own control, you're not allowed to come up with anything that anybody else has to do. Yeah? Not about something that society has to change, or if the future state was like this, life would be wonderful. That's no longer permitted as a question or a solution. Within the compass of your own control, with something you can do within your own power networks, and a lot of people here are in power networks, what's the one thing that you would do this year to make society resilient? And by resilient, I mean the ability to survive changed, but to survive, not the ability to survive unchanged. That's robustness. So I'll repeat it, yeah? What's the one thing you can do within the compass of your own control or power that would make society more able to survive changed, and it's something you've got to do within the next year? So I'll leave that open as a question. Okay,
Right.
we hand over.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I got